Welcome to the Massachusetts School of Law Educational Forum. Thank you for joining us. This program is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law at Andover. The topic for today's show is American Women in Combat, as written about in Kirsten Homestead's book, Band of Sisters. This book addresses a very important social issue: American women on the front lines in combat in Iraq. What are their experiences? What are their stories? Why don't we hear about them? Are female soldiers like their male counterparts? What about the children left at home? Joining me is the author of Band of Sisters, Kirsten Homestead. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Just a terrific book. Thank you for coming. Also joining me is the military's first black female combat pilot, Marine Captain Vernice Armour. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're very impressive. And also joining me is Gunnery Sergeant Rosie Knoll. Welcome. You've done some marvelous things. I'm very impressed. And I'm Diane Sullivan, your host for today's program. Kirsten, let me start with you. How is it that you became involved in this book, in the project, that you were following the war so very closely, that you ultimately write this great book?
Sure. I was working on a Master's in Fine Arts degree in a university down in North Carolina, and I live right near Camp Lejeune, the Marine Corps base there. And when the war started, I had to come up. I was working on my thesis. I had to start my thesis, and I was seeing all these women deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was wondering how they were going to do over there. I felt like this was a big experiment that was going to play out on the battlefield, and I really wanted to watch it closely. I think, first of all, I was hearing about the debate and about women in combat when they were actually going over there, and I just felt like it was crazy to debate this when they were actually there doing a job. And being a woman, I was empathizing and relating to these women and kind of wanted to put myself in their boots and see what they were going through and how they were doing. So when they started coming back, I began interviewing them and finding out about their experiences. Also, when the war started, you'd hear sound bites on TV and radio and in the newspaper, short articles about the women, but I was never fulfilled with those stories. I always wanted to learn more about them, and writing this book gave me that opportunity.
How is it that Americans have always believed, and still believe today, that war and combat are associated exclusively with men? Yet women, like our two guests here, are actually very involved in combat in Iraq and have been in other wars.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with chivalry and society and how we're raised. And men are just used to, cowboys and Indians and guns and G.I. Joe, and it's a whole societal thing. Mm-hmm. But women are in the boardroom, they're in the operating room, they're on the soccer fields now, they're everywhere, and now they're on the battlefield. And it's just society catching up to other societies, because there are other societies that allow women in combat and in their military. We're not the first.
Before we talk with our two Marines, one final question. For the audience, give us some idea of the scope of women's involvement in the war in Iraq.
Sure. Well, my story tells some of their stories. My book does. But we have women who are in firefights. We have women who are driving in convoys, driving trucks. They're logisticians, they're MPs. A lot of female MPs have been killed in Iraq. They're in military aviation for the first time in history in this war. Nurses, there have always been nurses, but all the medical staff now, there are women in all the medical staff. But they're all over the battlefield.
How many women have served in Iraq?
Well, female service members have served more than 167,000 tours of duty since the global war on terrorism began in 2002.
Wow.
That's an amazing number.
It is an amazing number, and it's surprising to me. I simply don't read or hear about that. Have many women been killed and wounded?
More than 80 have been killed, and another 500 have been, or more than 500 have been wounded.
Tell me, how does a young girl growing up in Tennessee end up in the cockpit of a Cobra helicopter? Tell me your story.
Well, actually, since the age of about 3 or 4, I wanted to be a police officer that rode a horse downtown. Well, when I got to college, I was putting myself through and didn't have that much money, so one of the flyers in the Student Union building really caught my attention. It said, "Free trip to Mardi Gras." It's like, free trip, that's great. Now notice it didn't say vacation, because you had to do something. You had to join the female rifle team with the ROTC program. And I did that, and it was just a great bond, great camaraderie. And my stepdad was a Marine, my grandfather was a Marine, and my dad was a retired major in the Army. So I said, hey, I got this military thing, I can do that. And I also thought it would help me in my endeavors to become that police officer. So I joined, immensely liked it. When I came back, I got involved in the ROTC program. Well, that next summer, I saw a black female in a flight suit, and I just, whoa. And it planted that seed when I saw that image. And I decided I wanted to be a female aviator.
What does it take for a woman to be a Cobra pilot?
Tenacity, ambition, hard work is basically what it boils down to, and the desire to do it.
When you were in the cockpit in Iraq, every day when you came home and landed, did you say, thank God I made it through another day, or were you not really that afraid?
Well, I'm deeply spiritual anyway, so I always say thank God for everything. He's just the reason for me being here in my being. But did I say it specifically for not dying out on the battlefield? No, not necessarily. I was out there doing a job just like all the other Marines that were there with me, and those that are there now doing that same job. So fear didn't really come into it. I was there to do a job. I was preparing to do the job the next day, so you really didn't have that mental downtime where you're just, shaking in your boots, I don't think.
What does it mean to be the first black female pilot in a Cobra helicopter? In the Department of Defense's history, you're the first black female pilot.
Well, first black female combat pilot and first black female pilot in the Marine Corps. It was very humbling. I couldn't believe it was, almost the new, after year 2000, the new millennium, and I'm doing it first. And I've actually received a good bit of flack about it sometimes, because they say red, yellow, white, black, doesn't matter. You're doing the same job that any other Marine pilot is doing. And I totally agree with that in one respect. But on the other side of it is Harvard, Yale, any of your schools have been around a long time. But when that young man or woman graduates and they're the first generation graduate for that family, and that family throws them a big party, they're proud of their son or daughter. So other women are proud of me. The other minority communities are proud of what I and other women have now done. So on one respect, I'm just a hard-working Marine going out there and doing it like all the other guys in my squadron. But on the other side of it, I've been blessed to be put in an opportunity to do not something special, I was just the first one to do it.
And it was always very important to you, as Kirsten says in her book, not that you were first, but you never wanted to be average.
Right. Yeah, I don't think we're here to be average. We've been given so many talents, and I believe everyone has a gift. And whatever those talents, gifts, that passion is, that it's incumbent upon me to give that back to the world and back to all my brothers and sisters here. To not give back would be the most selfish act. To whom much is given, much is required.
Rosie, tell us how you end up in combat in Iraq.
I actually, my unit wasn't deploying the whole unit, so I actually volunteered to go to a unit that was going to be considered an ace. They were going to be the stand-up squadron over there, and so I volunteered to go and fill a billet that was over there for a Marine Gunnery Sergeant.
Why?
Because I've trained, my entire career. I'm pistol qualified and I'm rifle qualified, just like any male is, and so I wanted the opportunity to do my job, and I chose to do that.
You are wounded while you're there. Describe that experience.
Well, there I was riding my bike, and that was one of the means that we got around. And I was just on my way to the armory, and a rocket, an indirect fired rocket, had landed and impacted about 100 meters away from me, and I was hit and struck in the jaw by a piece of shrapnel, an inch and a half long.
The doctor says to you, he's going to airlift you to Baghdad. You say, doctor, just stitch me up, send me back to my troops. Once again, I ask, why?
Because when I was wounded, Rosie wasn't wounded. Gunnery Sergeant Noel was, and it was my responsibility to those young Marines that were still there to return to them and set the example, and lift their morale, let them know that we can continue.
You could have used that as a way out, I'm assuming.
Oh yes, they really wanted to send me to Germany and home.
Kristen, back to you. After you sat down with the women as they came back and you interviewed them, what did you conclude about life for a woman living in the military, living in Iraq, living on a base? What is military life like for a woman?
Well, it's tough over there. And talking about Iraq and in combat specifically, I mean, they're definitely still the minority over there, and there are a lot of inconveniences, and they have to work. I still believe, and not all the women say this, but a lot of the women say that they have to work as hard, if not as harder, than the men over there to prove themselves and to show that they're capable or more than capable of doing their job. And I show that in several instances in the book. But they're just, they're constantly proving themselves, I think, over there. And probably back here as well.
Did you feel that pressure to prove yourself, Bernice?
Well, yes. Pressure, if you will, to do a good job. And hopefully all Marines are feeling that pressure to do a good job. But is there a little bit added? Yes, because you are representing a lot smaller group. Just like if you're running and you see a female fall out of a run, it's different than when a guy falls out of the run because, you know, all the females. But so I always tried to make sure I held myself to a higher standard because I'm representing Gunny out there just like she's representing me, and the females, you know, we're the band of sisters and we do have to stick together, and doing a good job, that's of the utmost importance, and I don't want anyone to see me doing otherwise.
Did you feel that you needed to run faster than the men or be better with a pistol than the men to be considered as good?
Not so much that I had to be better. It was, if I was going to be a leader, you lead from the front. And if I wasn't running, you know, at the same time that it took for a man to run a PFT, a physical fitness test, then how could I tell him that he needs to do a certain thing if I can't do it myself?
Okay, fair comment. Kirsten, back to you. One of the big social issues is children left at home. So after all of your research, after all of the stories, what do you conclude about the impact on children left at home while mom is over fighting in Iraq?
That's a tough one, the impact on the children. I can tell you the impact on the mothers, because we always hear about the impact on the fathers and how tough it is for the fathers to go over. Mm-hmm. And the women would say, and people say, oh, to the women it's got to be really difficult for you to leave your children at home, and there's no sugarcoating it. They don't sugarcoat it, and I don't sugarcoat it in the book. It is really hard for women to leave their children. But they would also say that it's hard for men to leave their children as well. So, you know, to say, this is what the women say throughout the book, you know, to say where, you know, it's harder for us to leave the children than the men, or you know, women shouldn't be in the military because they could be POWs. Well, what happens to a man is just as bad as what happens to a female, am I getting this right, a female POW? You know, just the experiences are good and bad. They're shared, they're kind of equal. So for people to just, I don't know, make those kind of comparisons, the women in the book just don't really buy it. They think it's tough for all of them in combat. But as far as the children left behind, I think it's going to take time to see. I mean, it's definitely hard for the children left behind. I mean, I know that. But how they survive down the road because of that experience, I think time will tell. Mm-hmm. But the Gunny may be able to shed a little light on that.
How did it impact you day to day, knowing you had children back here in the States?
When you're over there, you tend to not dwell on it so much. You're busy, you're doing your job, and it's important that you're focused on the mission at hand. So you try not to you know, dwell on, you know, missing your family or whatever. The internet, that helps to close the gap a little bit. You're able to you know email your children, and you know, you can sometimes, you know, get on a phone and talk to them a little bit. But as far as the impact for my children, they've only known the Marine Corps. So to them, it's kind of, it's normal. It's normal to them. I know that, you know, the general population, it's not normal that their mother wears combat boots, but to them, that's all they've known.
And I'm sure although they miss you, they're probably very, very proud of you.
Oh, extremely. My youngest son thinks it's cool that I've got a scar on my face.
Diane, there's also, I think you might remember the story about Paulie Montgomery,
Yes.
who's a lieutenant colonel and a mom, and she talks about women and men on the battlefield and how they can, the moms and dads, and how they can help each other out. You know, like she talks about one of her pilots who's having a hard time leaving his children behind, and how she can support him and actually get him ready to fly a mission by talking to him and empathizing with him. So I thought that was a good example of men and women helping each other out and supporting each other on the battlefield and getting one another mission ready, using our strengths and weaknesses.
Excellent comment. We need to take a break, so I'm going to ask our audience to stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Marine Captain Amy Mcgrath knew in the 7th grade that she wanted to be a fighter pilot. After graduating from the Naval Academy, she faced what is still a fairly unique and daunting challenge: learning how to fit into a typically all-male fighter squadron. As a weapon systems operator, or backseater, Mcgrath configured missiles and bombs for battle. Marcia Lilly dreamed of the ocean as a child. During her first deployment as a Navy aviation bosun's mate handler, Lilly worked on the water in one of the most hazardous environments in the world, the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, where helicopters and jets take off and land on a small, moving runway.
The world I see is fair and free, where people can travel wherever they please, and children can eat and have shoes on their feet, and not be afraid when they walk on the street. It's not like there has to be rainbows and bunnies, or streets full of people all dancing like dummies, but freedom to live, to learn, and to play, to just be yourself and think your own way. The road I see may sound crazy to you, but hopefully, someday, you'll see it too.
Lance Corporal Carrie Blaze was a heavy equipment mechanic. Lance Corporal Priscilla Kispetic worked in maintenance. Both were stationed at Al Assad Airfield. Both volunteered to go outside the wire to search Iraqi women and children. Both wound up in a firefight. Army medic Rochelle Spores was on her way to treat wounded Marines when her ambulance ran over a stack of IEDs. Spores was seriously wounded. Her passenger wasn't as fortunate.
Welcome back to the Educational Forum. We are discussing the book, Band of Sisters. Kirsten, why do women join the military? What's your conclusion?
Well, based on women I interviewed, many joined for educational benefits. Some joined for financial security. Others joined for career opportunities, and many of these are the same reasons men join. One of the things I thought was interesting, and this may be true, this is probably true of men too, but a lot of the women who I interviewed had male figures in their family who were in the military, a father, grandfather, uncle. So I think those individuals were persuasive in those women joining. But it definitely resembled why the men join.
Vernice, why did you join the Marines?
Well, I joined the Army previously just because I thought it could help with my law enforcement career and becoming a police officer. Right. Now, joining the Marines, I actually wanted to do something that was a little tougher, so that automatically ruled out the Air Force and the Navy. So that's not a play on the Army, but the Marines are just known as the ultimate, the elite, the most physically fit. And on top of that, my grandfather was a Marine, and I have two dads. My dad, Clarence, was a Marine back in Vietnam, and my dad was a retired major in the Army. So it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to also be an officer and a pilot in the Marine Corps. So I knew at this time I was a police officer. I could always go back and be a cop, but I didn't always have the opportunity to be a United States Marine. So,
do you think men join for the same reason as women do?
I would say for the most part. Now, there might be slightly more men that just want to join to shoot a gun or blow something up, but that's why I joined. I wanted to shoot a gun or blow something up. So in the Army, I got to do that, and definitely as an attack helicopter pilot, I got to do that. Plus, I enjoyed my dream of being that police officer. So to me, it's all about living your dreams and living your passions.
No regrets?
None.
Rosie?
I was actually going to school. I was in college, and I was working 2 jobs trying to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my friends, their parents were paying their way through college. And I went to pay my rent one day, and the landlord's building that he owned also was the building that housed the recruiting station. And I walked past there, and I thought, just because of those service members, and because of Marines, that we have the freedom to, be pampered or do whatever we want to do. And my friends thought that, Roughing It was black and white TV. So because of the military, we have those freedoms, and so that's why I joined.
Talking about roughing it, there is a point that they need to, or believe the military, the medical doctors feel you need a steel jaw. You need a plate anyway put in your jaw. You refuse. You say, once again, stitch me up, I'm staying here, I'll be back on the field, let me go back with my squadron. You see pain as a good thing.
Yes. When I was because I was airlifted, they sedated me mm-hmm. because I was trying, I guess, to get off the operating table and return to my Marines. And
why doesn't that surprise us?
And when I was out in Balad, they discussed with me sending me on to Germany to have a steel plate put in my jaw wired shut. And that wasn't an option for me, because if I'd have gone to Germany, they'd have sent me home, and I wasn't leaving my Marines. So I stuck to my guns on that one and insisted that I would be okay. And the doctor basically asked me, if I, would not eat anything solid for 6 weeks, that I could go back. And so I told him cheesecake is soft and Oreos get soft in milk. And they let me go back. And I actually really did eat Oreo cookies.
Well, that's one good thing. Vernice, Kirsten in her book talks about Cobra pilots and that whole branch of the military, so to speak, saying that, quite frankly, it's very difficult that Cobras eat their young. Mm-hmm. They're not nice as a community. Should I go on, or is that the gist of it?
That's the gist of it.
How'd you survive all that?
The way all the rest of the guys survived it. We have to be anal, we have to be dedicated and sticklers. Because when you go out there, lives are at stake. So if you're not tough back in the training environment, if you're not stressed or put under stress in the training environment, how are you going to survive a wartime environment? So everything that I went through and any of the other guys went through was to prepare us for that ultimate battle. And we actually ended up going to Iraq when the conflict came up. So, it's all for the ultimate reason why we're training is war.
You don't go to Iraq once. You are deployed a second time. You come home, as I understand it from Kirsten's book, on your 30th birthday at 9 p.m. at night.
That's right.
All right. Well, first off, how'd you feel when you got back home?
Oh, I was elated, happy, ecstatic. My mom, my dad's, my brothers, my cousins, friends, everybody was there, and it was awesome.
You go back a second time. Kirsten describes your second deployment as more dangerous than your first. Tell us about the battlefield, Fallujah, if you will, in April of 2004. You were part of that?
Yes. Well, the difference is when we first went over there and, you know, the war and the road to Baghdad, we didn't get as much resistance as we're currently getting even right now. The insurgents are fighting back. They're using more surface-to-air missiles, more RPGs, where when we went over the first tour, we could fly directly over cities in support of our troops on the ground, where the second time when I went back, we, you know, avoided urban areas only when we specifically had to target, just because they were shooting at us more and attacking more.
Do you remember in the chapter where you highlight, Vernice, you talk about the battle in the mosque?
Mm-hmm.
Tell the audience a little bit about that.
Me tell them?
Yes.
Why don't you have Bernice tell them?
Okay, Vernice, you're up again.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
You'll do a better
That's okay.
job.
Oh, it was during the Battle of Najaf. It was August 10th. And we had just finished prosecuting a target in one of the buildings. It was a weapons cache, and we were transferred to another air controller, and we were told that they needed air support, and they were pinned down by indirect fire. Captain Jason Grogan was in the back seat, and Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Butler was controlling the section with the Huey. Well, he gave us tactical control because we had one more missile left on our aircraft, and it's called a tow missile, and it's wire guided. Well, the troops down on the ground didn't have any way to mark their position besides with a mirror, and they couldn't mark the target with smoke or anything because they didn't have anything to mark with. And again, they were pinned down and in a dire situation. So they were able to talk us onto the target, and I was able to sight it through the camera on the front of the helicopter. We circled around, came back, popped up, and now we're looking down. I've reacquired the target.
How high up are you?
About 800 feet. And we're in a dive headed towards the target, you know, getting everything in our reticle to shoot the missile. Well, it's set up, I'm looking down, pull the trigger, nothing happened. And this is our last missile. So if this one doesn't work, we don't have anything to put on target besides the rockets. And our guys, again, are in dire need because they're pinned down. I pull the trigger one more time because every second we're getting closer to this target. Missile shoots off, impacts the target. Jason follows up with 6 to 8 missiles in the back seat. We pull off to the right, and I fire 20 millimeter, and the Huey covers our pull-off as we leave the area. Well, that was our last missile. We're Winchester at this point. We go back to base. We found out later that day that they didn't receive any more incoming fire. And about 4 or 5 months later, I'm in the hospital. There's a young man in front of me, and I'm always talking to Marines anyway, just, hey, how you doing, what's going on? And he told me he was there for physical therapy, and he said he had some shrapnel in his leg. I was like, oh, so you're recently deployed? He said, yes, he was on the 11th MEU. I said, hey, I was on the 11th MEU. And I said, I was your air support. He was like, oh, wow, that's cool, you know. And I said, I fly Cobras. He's like, hey, I was on a mission. We were pinned down. We called for air support. Cobra and a Huey came in and destroyed the target. I was like, that sounds like a mission I was on. And we paired up the days, and it was the same mission, and I was all excited and like, yeah. And he was just looking at me very solemnly. And he said, ma'am, you saved my life. And you have no idea, you know, how that makes me or probably anybody else, Marine-wise, that would feel to hear that. Because for me, that's our sole purpose in life, is to support those guys on the ground. So to run into a Marine, you know, and hear that, it's you know, wow, because you usually don't get the feedback from the battlefield. You go out there, you do your job, you go back to base, and, you know, so it's pretty amazing.
That is. Kirsten, are women prepared, in your opinion, for what they experience when they get onto the battlefield?
Absolutely, which is interesting, but as we've talked about before, many of them have the same training that the men have, and when they're in a firefight, when they're in the Cobra cockpit, wherever they are, the training kicks in. The training's so good. And in that first story, if you recall, it's 2 young Lance Corporals who are in a firefight, and one of the Lance Corporals says afterwards that she always complained about the training, but after that firefight, she was never going to complain about the training again because her training kicked in and it saved her life. And that's, you know, it saves her life, it saves the ones on the battlefield. So yeah, they definitely, I don't think I've talked to anyone who says she wasn't prepared for, I mean, and that they all say that they were where they needed to be which I thought was great too, because some enlisted before 9/11 and some afterwards, but they all felt like they were where they needed to be at the time they were there.
Tell us about Marcia Little. That was one of my favorite
Marcia
stories.
Lilly.
Marcia.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's aviation boatswain's mate handler on. She was on the USS Harry S. Truman, and then she went back again on the Eisenhower. And she's petite. She was, I think, under 100 pounds when she was out there on the aircraft carrier, and she worked on the flight deck, which if you've never been on a flight deck, even on a nice day, if you're around 100 pounds, the wind out there in the ocean, even if there's a small breeze, it can definitely, it's hard to grip your feet on that surface. The surface can be wet, it can be slick from oil, the fumes from the engines. It's a hazardous environment. On a good day, and on a quiet day, it's a hazardous environment. Then you get the aircraft coming and going in wartime, and it's really dangerous. And she worked out there. She chalked and changed. There's a lot of jargon involved in the Navy. I mean, this was the hardest story to write when it came to jargon and just explaining everything. She operated what they call a Ouija board, which is a small board that's representative of the flight deck. And it was her responsibility to show where all the aircraft were as a template. And they had all these little like puzzle pieces, and she had to move them around and show where each of the aircraft were located on the flight deck. And if she messed up and said that an aircraft was not getting ready, was not like parked, and that instead, if she said it wasn't parked and that instead, if it was on the flight deck and an aircraft was coming in and she didn't show that it was there, then there could be a serious accident, a collision or something. I mean, what she did was really important. And she was moving aircraft. I think, she was a tractor, I think they call them tractor kings. She was in charge of moving aircraft around, and oh my gosh, you back up a couple feet too far.
And you're off.
And that aircraft and that tractor and Marcia are overboard. I mean, it's just, it's a dangerous job, and the people out there, 19, 20, 21, and I think somebody says in the story, and I don't know if this went in the story, but a 19-year-old, I'm not even sure you want to give them the keys to your car, and they're out there on the flight deck moving these $50 million aircraft. It's incredible.
What impressed me so much about her, and I loved your writing because there's one point where she makes some kind of a mistake, and I will use this term loosely, but the supervisor starts screaming, what dumb blank did X? Oh, yeah. And she pipes up, it was me. And he yells at her, well, what were you thinking? And she says, I wasn't. That's the point of it all. I wasn't thinking. And it really makes me appreciate how honest, women can be.
Mm-hmm. And then later she says, I think she says she was hungry. And she just wanted to get off the flight
That I can
deck.
relate to. President Clinton signed the exclusion for women in combat. When did it really open up to women?
In military aviation, I think it was all in the mid-1990s, mm-hmm. 94, mm-hmm. 95.
Are women in the military here to stay?
Well, absolutely.
Well, that's what I want to hear.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've been here. We're standing on the shoulders of many women that came before us. So.
And in fact, other countries routinely have used women.
Right.
Yes.
What about in Iraq? Are there Iraqi women in the military?
Yes. There's a picture of Yolanda Mayo. She's a public affairs chief. And she, I don't know if this picture's in the book, but she's sitting among, and I think it's just Iraqi women, and they're in uniform. And Yolanda was telling me that they risk their lives, their families, everything to serve their country. And I don't know, I imagine they're not much more accepted by their government doing that than they were a couple of years ago when this picture was taken. But they are in the military, but they are risking everything, their family, the lives of their family members to do it. So I don't imagine there are a whole lot of them doing it.
Totally different question. How did the capture and the rescue of Jessica Lynch open up the public spotlight, if at all, to women in the military?
Can I start?
Yes, you may.
Well, that was, and I haven't even mentioned that, but that was an impetus for me writing this book, because here was this girl who got lost in it, and I'm not saying it was her fault. I mean, I kind of, I think this was an issue with the Army, but But here was this woman who got lost, who was being held up as this hero. And I just thought there are so many women over there doing fabulous things who truly are heroes, who aren't being recognized. And it seemed to me that this one woman was enough for the Army, but it wasn't enough for me, because there are too many women over there risking their lives and making sacrifices, family sacrifices, bodily parts, who are being wounded and killed. So that was, you talk about, your question had to do with how did that open up the recognition.
The public's perception of women in the military.
Well, one of the things I just want to say is that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book. So hopefully this book will open up the eyes and show that Jessica Lynch was not the only female over there, and all the wonderful things they're doing.
What was your reaction to the media's coverage of that?
Well, ironically, I was in the advanced course. That's a formal school that they send Marine gunnery sergeants to, and I was the only female in the class. So when that happened, everybody wanted to know my opinion on it. And it was simple. There's no difference to me for her getting wounded and captured as would be any male getting wounded or captured. And I didn't agree that and not her fault, she didn't ask for the media hype, but I was very, very disappointed in the handling of the hype, because again, she makes the same, she was making the same sacrifice, if you will, that a man is, yet they made such a big deal about it. And financially she recouped a little from that. We have our male counterparts that are wounded, and also ironically a friend of mine had been killed during that same time that I was at the advanced course. So that, it had that extra little personal connotation to it that it frustrated me, because I knew that he had a young son that was like 5 or 6 years old. So,
Vernice?
Well, it's a little difficult of a question when you think about it sometimes, because women are paying the same price as the men. Should there be more hype for a woman dying or being wounded over there? In a realistic world, no, it's all the same thing. But whenever you look at the beginning of something, people are going to just give it more attention. Like when the first female combat pilot died, and this is back, I think, in the first Gulf War, flying the jet, it was really blown up. But back when, World War II, and you had the Wasp, and you had the Tuskegee Airmen, and each time, you've gone through an evolutionary cycle when it comes to the military, it's been in the media. Today, we're much more media-centric than we've ever been when it comes to the military and war and being overseas. So it's just exponentially, blown up. So each time we've gone through something like this in our history, it's hit the media, whether it was male or female, whether it was the Black Marines or the women flying the aircraft and giving their lives, because many women perished just transporting aircraft for the men over there to fly. So should it be blown out of